Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So, a few more videos, this time from different media outlets. So, Sky News, CNN and BBC News. Just to show how they're covering this Israel-Hamas war. They all seem to be saying the same things about the humanitarian crisis. What's interesting is how you can get different information from different outlets, and that's the problem, I guess, with journalism and whatever, that when you're covering something that's so vast, that there's so much information and that you have to pick certain bits, and it depends on how you're reporting and all that kind of stuff, because you hear some bits from one, some bits from the other, then all together to create the whole picture, and therefore it's easy to not mislead, I suppose, to get a picture that may not be accurate. Talking about when they talk about the oil and stuff, because it seems like the IDF have two arguments from the different media outlets that have reported it. On the IDF spokesman talks on CNN about Hamas having oil tankers and saying that they should be distributing them to their people because they're responsible, because they're an elected party in Gaza. Whereas on BBC News they talk about IDF has said that they don't want fuel to come in because they don't want Hamas to use it. But when the IDF spokesman on CNN is asked why don't you strike that, they say they don't want to get rid of the fuel because they wanted to give it to the people, if they want to target civilians. So I don't know, but it's like watching real-time Animal Farm or 1984 going on with this propaganda and the way that, the one thing that comes across all of them, like I've said before, is the stoic approach to humanity, the heartless approach. You hear one of the, I think it's from Labour, when he talks about the heartache of seeing the pictures of children. I don't hear the emotion that I shared when I saw them, when it made me cry. I don't hear the passion or the rage that these people are being killed. It doesn't matter who they are. I don't care whether they're Israeli, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Arabic, whether they're English, whether they're Western, whether they're Chinese, whether they're Russian, whether they're Ukrainian, whether they're Palestinian. It doesn't matter, they're human beings. We should care about all human beings that are getting killed, and especially children. Come on, it can't be right. And they're all not calling for a ceasefire. It's like, and these are the people that are in charge of us. What do you think they care about us if they don't care about actually witnessing? And it doesn't matter about, yes, I fully understand of the reasoning of why Israel is doing it because of the October 7th massacre, which was, terrible. I think the problem is because we haven't seen this footage, because they're keeping it from us. I think they should release that footage to the general public so we can see exactly, I suppose they have to blur a lot of it out. But that's why I think in the news they should show the real humanity. They should show how barbaric we all are, and then we'd understand a lot more. But that still doesn't justify what's happening to these children in Palestine. The blockade, the siege. Because if you think about it, and I was thinking about this, like if there was a terrorist event, say, happen, and in a building, and there was, 10 terrorists, and there were 20 hostages, and say it was happening, wherever in the West, they're not going to, say, oh, well, because there's terrorists in there, we're going to cut off electricity, gas and water, and then we're going to bomb it, and hope to capture hope to get the hostages. It just wouldn't be feasible, would it? Now, I'd understand if it was just this building and there were only the terrorists in there, you could cut off everything because then only they would suffer. But the problem is once you have other people who are suffering, that's collective punishment and it's against international law. So it seems clear that this is collective punishment because we're seeing children who are not members of Hamas. They may be children of Hamas leaders, but they're not because they're children, they're not Hamas. and yet we're seeing them suffering and we're seeing them dying. Numbers may be inflated, both sides probably can't be trusted to give true figures, but we're seeing it happening. And therefore, I think it is collective punishment. It's not just collateral damage. I don't see the reasoning, like I said before, for cutting off food, electricity and water when you know there's so many civilians in there. It just seems, what troubles me is, how do you defend it? What's the mindset of this and the West for supporting this? And it seems to be, I don't know, is there not, like, we've seen how different people are treated around the world. We've seen it historically. You know, just ask someone from Africa or someone who's a person of colour how they're treated. We see this with Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. There's common denominators in all these things. That worries me. That how, you know, I don't think we would bomb France in the same way or treat the situation in France the same way as we would if it's happening in the Middle East or Africa. And turning a blind eye seems to be easy. And that troubles me because that speaks of a mindset, and that speaks of seeing things differently. It speaks of a horrific way of not actually understanding that we're all human beings. Anyway, so you can hear these different reports.
Just a moment.
Oh, and the weakness of these people in power who refuse to say things because they're worried about whether they're going to get in the government or not, or refuse to say things about things because they don't want to overstep people's feet. Refuse to be humans. Maybe that should be the title.
Let me tell you what's happening as far as the papers are concerned this morning. The Telegraph leads with Israeli condemnation of the UN Secretary General after Antonio Guterres said that the Hamas attacks did not happen in a vacuum. The Guardian focuses on the UN's call for an immediate ceasefire to end epic suffering in Gaza under a picture of Yocheved Lifshitz, one of the 2 Hamas hostages freed yesterday. And the Times writes about the 85-year-old's ordeal, saying her nightmare goes on. Minister's here, Robert Jenrick. Hi, it's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. My goodness me, what on earth happened overnight with the UN Secretary General? There's been calls by Israel for him to resign after his speech in New York. I'm sure you've heard what he had to say. What did you make of his comments?
Well, I'm not going to comment directly on what the Secretary General said, but I would say 2 things. Firstly, Israel didn't start this war. Israel was subjected to the most horrific and barbaric attack by Hamas. You've seen the appalling scenes of rapes and murders and kidnaps. And so it is Hamas who is entirely to blame for this conflict. And secondly, because of that, there shouldn't be any false equivalence between Israel and Hamas. Israel is a free democratic country trying to defend itself. It must do that in accordance with international law, and we've spoken extensively to Israel to encourage them to do so, and we're confident that they are. But you can't compare them and their activities to a brutal and evil terrorist organization like Hamas.
Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation, and 1,400 murders didn't happen in a vacuum, is what the UN Secretary General said. Is that responsible language in your opinion?
Well, I don't think, as I said, that you should be comparing Israel to Hamas, and neither should you be suggesting in any way that Israelis, innocent Israeli civilians, are to blame of any culpability for what happened. The events of 2 weeks ago were exclusively the responsibility of Hamas, one of the most evil and murderous, barbaric terrorist organizations in the world. So whether it's the Secretary General or anyone else, the blame for the tragedy that we're currently seeing in Palestine and Gaza and Israel lies squarely with Hamas. They are the enemy of the Gazan population because they are using people in Gaza as human shields, and they're subjecting civilians in Gaza, as in Israel, to the most appalling and tragic consequences of their actions.
How should we interpret the words suffocating occupation for 56 years, 1,400 murders didn't happen in a vacuum. How should we interpret that?
Well, it's for the Secretary General to explain his comments. I've given you my view and that of the British government, that our position is very clear. We support Israel's right to defend itself. We are appalled by what happened 2 weeks ago, and we want to see Israel secure its borders. Above all, we want to get those hostages back. That is our priority now. Whether
we will come to the hostages
or other citizens.
We'll come to the hostages, Minister, if we may. But just to clarify on that, and you're not going to go any further. But you're not going to say that it's inappropriate language from him, but it's not something that the British government recognises.
Yeah, we would never make any connection between the events that we saw in Israel, the appalling terrorist attack, and any activities of the state of Israel. Israel is a free democratic country with the right to defend itself, and we're supporting them in that effort because the world will be a better place if we can rid it of Hamas.
He goes on to say clear violations of humanitarian law in Gaza. Would you agree with that?
We don't agree with that. If he's referring to what has happened over the course of the last 2 weeks, we don't believe that Israel has broken international law. There is a clear right in international law for a nation to defend itself, and that's what Israel is doing. We do want to see Israel, wherever practicable, and it's immensely difficult to do, to surgically degrade and eradicate Hamas. That's what they're trying to do, and we obviously hope that they succeed, because, as I say, the world will be a better place. It will be a blessing if we can rid the world of Hamas.
Will the UK support a temporary ceasefire to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza?
Well, we're not asking for a ceasefire. It's very difficult, in fact, it's impossible to reach agreement with a terrorist organisation hell-bent on the destruction of your country and your people. What we have been working at the highest levels for is for further humanitarian aid, whether that be food, fuel, medical supplies, or other support, to get in to Gaza to support the civilian population there, many of whom are undoubtedly suffering. The challenge there is not just, of course, persuading the parties to agree to that, such as Egypt, but it's also ensuring that that isn't diverted by Hamas. Hamas do have a history of misusing aid and particularly fuel that's gone into Gaza for their own purposes. The one group of people who are not starving in Gaza are Hamas. We've got to ensure that doesn't happen. So we understand why the neighbouring countries around Gaza will be thinking very carefully about that and how the aid can enter the country without being diverted for terrorist purposes.
All that said, it's not just Gutierrez. Save the Children have made a direct appeal to the Prime Minister today. There's an ad in some of the papers, not least The Guardian, demanding a ceasefire now.
Well, as I say, you can't reach agreement, or it's very difficult to reach agreement, with a terrorist organisation. And our priority right now has to be enabling Israel to defend itself and getting the hostages out. I mean, remember, there are still
coming to the hostages. Want to talk to you about this call from Save? No, they're not.
There are hundreds.
No one's forgetting about the hostages.
Some people are. There are
certainly not on this programme. Save the Children demanding that people, that the Prime Minister tell Rishi Sunak to call for an immediate ceasefire.
Well, as I say, we support Israel's right. In fact, its obligation to defend itself. And we want to see the hostages out, so that the first step that could be taken by Hamas would be to release those innocent men, women, and children that they are keeping captive in Gaza. That's the kind of depraved organisation that we're dealing with, and talk of making peace with them seems fanciful, at least until they've made that first step.
Ceasefire's not making peace, though, is it? Talk to me about British hostages. How many are there?
Well, we haven't said the exact number, but we're working very closely with Israel and with other countries to identify British citizens and to work with partners to try to seek their release, particularly Qatar. And the Prime Minister has spoken to the Emir of Qatar a number of times, seeking his support and help to get those British nationals out. So for the families who are undoubtedly in immense pain and worry right now, what I can say is that we are doing absolutely everything that we can to secure their release. Okay.
Talk to me about migrant hotels. How many of the ones that you're withdrawing from are in Labour constituencies?
They're a mix of different constituencies and in all four nations across the country. We don't release the list for security reasons.
So there are in Labour constituencies
of course,
as well?
absolutely, yes.
Okay, so what the information that we're getting is that they're all in Tory constituencies. That's incorrect.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily read everything that you read, believe everything you read in the press. That was
so that's
story.
Incorrect.
It's incorrect, absolutely. They're in a range of different constituencies right across the country. When I took on this job a year ago, I was very clear that the use of hotels for asylum seekers was wrong. It was completely inappropriate and had to end. And as a result of the work that we've done over the last 12 months...
The reason I wanted to play that bit is because the fact that it says don't trust the media. And they're always telling us trust the media, etc. But...
can fix this.
The reason why, I just don't know. The idea of not talking with terrorists, I'm sure we talked with the IRA, no? And you have to try, isn't it? You want to try and find peace, and I don't understand, like, if we know that, everyone says that Hamas is not looking after the people of Palestine, people of Gaza, and therefore then, well, if they're not doing that, and they're not doing that, then you need to help out the innocent people in Gaza that they claim are also being held hostage by Hamas. So therefore you do need to help them, because otherwise you know that Hamas aren't going to help them, and then what are you actually letting happen that you actually know about? It's another one of those mindset things I can see from how people are talking. There does into this mindset of not caring for people in general, human beings, and that's part of why I don't believe the system that we live in is right, because it doesn't cultivate humanity within each of us. It allows us to separate ourselves from each other and create these differences. But it just, I don't know, just not to call for a ceasefire, just so everyone can stop killing each other for a little while and the hostages can be released. And if they are with Hamas and if they are in the bunkers, Hamas keeps saying that they do get killed in the Israeli airstrikes. Which would make sense, because you'd think that they're going to put them in the bunkers with them. They're not going to just leave them outside. So therefore, if you're hitting those targets to get Hamas, you're then also hitting the hostages that is your primary reason for this action. And as they're starting to release them now, wouldn't it be better to have a ceasefire, bring in some aid for those actual innocent people? Maybe there's a way you could just protect the fuel so it does go to the hospitals. I don't know, I guess it wouldn't be safe for them to go in there, but maybe just give it to the UN and hope that they can be trusted. I don't know, it just seems that people are seeing these images of children and suffering, and I know the media and all organisations, you heard how Robert Jenrick emphasised the word children, because we know that in the Iraq and Afghanistan war, when children are always used because it creates empathy. But nevertheless, we do know that children are suffering and dying, and that can't be right, no? There can't be any justification for that, surely. I don't know. Anyway, here's the next one, which is also some Sky News.
Again, everybody, no sign of a ceasefire. The number of dead inside Gaza continues to grow. Sky's team inside the Gaza Strip have been to its biggest hospital in the north, where doctors say the hospital will cease to function in just a matter of days. Our international correspondent John Sparks reports a warning. His report shows people injured in airstrikes.
As the conflict intensifies, as the airstrikes increase, healthcare in Gaza is teetering on the brink. Here at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, they do what they can. Life-saving treatment is administered on the floor. The suffering in this building, experienced by all. This is the largest hospital in Gaza, but it's on the verge of collapse. The doctors can't cope with the casualties, and the hospital is running out of basic supplies.
Over the last 24 hours, there have been 600 people killed and almost three times the number of wounded. All of them have come to Shifa Hospital. The crisis at Shifa Hospital just keeps getting deeper and deeper. The fuel is running low. We are getting more and more electricity cutouts. Yesterday, one of the biggest hospitals in the north of Gaza has completely run out of fuel, which itself adds to the pressures on Shifa Hospital.
51 pallets of medicine have just reached this facility, but doctors say it's a drop in the ocean. The British Palestinian, Dr. Abu Sita, says they've only got a few days left.
My estimate is that the hospital will cease to be able to function by within a week. Ya hala.
And with that, he was off. There's too much to do. And the head of the UN agrees with him. The humanitarian situation deteriorating by the hour, said Antonio Guterres. The hospital also acts as a sanctuary, providing shelter to 45,000 people. Some camp in the corridors, others living on the grounds, a miniature city amongst the rubble. Our team met the Haruda family, now occupying a spot in the car park. Mother Noah moved them on Friday after prayers as the sound of the bombing increased.
I pulled all the kids from wherever they were, some of them barefoot, some of them not dressed properly, some screaming and shouting because of the bombs. Thank God we made it to the hospital.
The Israelis have ordered them to evacuate to the south, but many have refused to go. It may be dangerous in the middle of Gaza City, but Israel's attacking the entire strip. We spoke to 16-year-old Hala.
The situation we're in now, everything has changed. I wake up in the morning, sleeping on the sand. Everywhere is sand. Seriously, I'm in a situation in which I hope to go back home. I want to sleep in my bed.
Aid is barely trickling into Gaza, and the UN agency which distributes it says it's almost out of fuel, warning they'll have to stop work in the next 24 hours. The lives of 2 million are imperiled. John Sparks, Sky News.
Joined now by the former Consul General to Jerusalem, Sir Vincent Finn. Hi, Sir Vincent. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I wonder what you made of what the UN Secretary General said overnight in New York. He talked about suffocating occupation that Palestinians had had to deal with for 56 years. And he talked about murders of Israelis that, in his words, didn't happen in a vacuum.
I think it's important in this fog of war to know who to listen to. There are so many voices coming at us. I listened to Pope Francis and Archbishop Welby, Josep Borrell, the head of the European Union Foreign Service. And I do listen to Guterres. He is briefed by the UN Relief Works Agency, which works on the ground, where 35 people from that agency have been killed in the bombing. There is a context. I think we should focus for now on a humanitarian pause in order to allow, first of all, to allow the hostages negotiation to go forward in a better atmosphere. 4 out of 220 have been released. There are 5 Brits among the 220. That's important. But as your videos have shown, the necessity of delivering fuel to those hospitals in North and South Gaza is vital. It will change lives. It will save lives. I heard both our Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition on Monday talking about the need for fuel to get in. It hasn't happened yet. It needs to happen today because UNRWA are warning that those hospitals will shut if they don't get fuel. Now, the last point about a humanitarian pause, I heard, as I said, what Mr. Jenrick said about ceasefire, is that it will stop the bombing, at least for a time. And as I left my wife this morning, I said, see you later. The people in Gaza can't say that to their wives and families because they don't know what will happen next. That too needs to stop.
You said 5 British hostages. Is that a confirmed number?
It's what I heard was 5 missing.
We don't know that they're hostages.
We don't know the detail. We do know that our diplomats and our Foreign Secretary are working hard night and day to secure their release with colleagues in Qatar, Egypt, and elsewhere.
Okay. What do you make of the minister representing the government this morning saying no to a ceasefire?
No to a ceasefire. Ultimately, this conflict needs to end. I can't predict what the government of Israel will do. I do hope it will listen to the calls from Tony Blinken and others for a humanitarian pause. Eventually, there will be a ceasefire. Eventually, the fighting will stop. And it's quite important to look to that day and to the question, what will the world and what will this region look like after that? I believe, and my charity, the Balfour Project, believes that there is a certain UK responsibility here, historically, from the Balfour Declaration and the time of the Mandate, when we ran Palestine until 1948, to take a lead now for equality between Israelis and Palestinians. We have learned, and this episode tells us, that unilaterally imposed security does not bring safety, neither for Israelis nor for Palestinians. There needs to be another way. And I was very impressed, actually, by what Mr. Sunak said on Monday about challenging those who undercut aspirations, legitimate aspirations to Palestinian statehood. As I personally believe that the way out of this is equality between Palestinians and Israelis, and ideally in two states.
We heard from the UN Secretary General saying that there have been clear violations of international law. The British government doesn't think so.
Clearly, Hamas has committed an atrocity. Hamas has committed a crime against humanity. I read a remarkably good letter from Lord Neuberger, the former president of the UK Supreme Court and a member of the Jewish community, with other Jewish lawyers in the Financial Times last week, in which he said, clearly Hamas is responsible for its own crimes. He went on to say that there is a need for objectivity in war. I'm using my own words here to paraphrase. And if the policy or if the actions of the Israeli government are to undertake collective punishment of the Palestinian people in Gaza, if that is the case, then it would be a crime. Now, the International Criminal Court is seized of this matter. Palestine is a member of the court under the court ruling, and therefore anything that is happening now in Gaza and in Israel, we must be aware of ongoing indiscriminate rocket fire from Hamas into Israel, as well as the holding of those poor hostages. That collection of evidence needs to be studied by the ICC, and I would ask our government to change its policy. Back in the time of Boris Johnson, it said that it didn't want the ICC to investigate previous alleged war crimes in Gaza and Israel. I'd like them to change that message now because of the urgency and the need for objectivity in this matter.
We must leave it there, Sir Vincent, but I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Thank
Pleasure.
you. Thank you.
I mean, there was a lot of interesting points in there. The problem is, believing it with the ICC is, how long will that take? You know? Because we know how, in the West, bureaucracy, how long things take. Look at the COVID inquiries going on for years. Look at, Primados and all these other things, how, decades it takes. Waiting for them, everyone could be dead by the time. It's not going to be a quick thing, is it? Has anyone even filed these? And the thing is, what I don't get is, I wish that Sky News, they've been reporting on this for 3 weeks now. Why hasn't any researcher gone and looked at what is international law? It must be written down. Is it the Geneva Convention? Is there the ICC? Do they have international law? Everything written down. And pick out the points and say to Robert Jenrick or Blinken or Bush or Biden or Sunak or whoever, under international law, code number, blah, 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 it says this, read it out.
And then, like say if it says, the moving of people from one area to the other, and then, then you could say, and then here's the evidence of the leaflets that were dropped telling people to move from here to the other, or collective punishment. I suppose the problem with collective punishment, it's that one's not so clear cut, because then you have to prove, is it collective punishment, and etc., and what's collateral damage and what's allowed, how many people, civilians, can you kill in a war without it being collective punishment. So that one may be more grey and difficult, but clear ones like, electricity, water and food should be left on. I looked it up on Google and it comes up in the Geneva Convention. So, if there's something written like that, and, you can get a speech by Benjamin Netanyahu saying that to cut that off, or the IDF saying to cut that off, or someone inside saying it has been cut off, and, then it'll be easily, those are clear-cut ones. So we can establish that international law has, rather than this being up in the air, that's being left. Either it is or isn't being frustrated. If international law is published, it shouldn't be difficult to ascertain. There are, like I say, the ones where it's collective punishment, where it's a judgment has to be made. But the other ones where if it says you shouldn't do this and we know they've done it, well, that's clear. And I don't know. That's why I don't like war, isn't it? I think the killing of humanity shows that that we've lost, isn't it? Because this should be the last resort. Well, it shouldn't be at all, really. I mean, nothing benefits from killing each other, not really. Anyway, here's the next one from CNN.
Hamas. His comments come amid concerns over the hostages and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where the death toll is still rising. IDF spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner joins me now from Tel Aviv. Good to have you with us.
Good morning.
So 8 groups are saying that people in Gaza desperately need fuel, or they'll run out within the next 24 hours. The IDF has released an image on social media claiming that Hamas has more than 500,000 litres of fuel. How do you know that there is fuel there in Gaza? And if it belongs to Hamas, why not strike it?
So obviously the people of Gaza are not the enemy of Israel. Our enemy is Hamas, who is holding 222 Israelis hostages, but also holding 2 million Palestinians hostage. If the aid organizations are so concerned with helping the people of Gaza, instead of demanding Israel facilitate the people, it should demand from Hamas. Hamas need to stand up to their responsibility and give, if they want the hospitals to continue to operate, if they want water, clean water to be pumped through the system, they should distribute the fuel that they have to the people they say that they protect. This is the reality on the ground. In demanding Israel give its enemies fuel that will be ultimately used to keep their tunnel system operating.
Just to correct him there, no one's demanding that relief agencies give fuel to Hamas. They want to give it to the people of Gaza. So that worries me, that mindset from that argument, not even thinking about what he's saying.
Israel give its enemies fuel that will be ultimately used to keep their tunnel system operating, or to keep their weapons firing at us, is, that would be immoral to our own people. So I would say, first of all, use the fuel that already exists in different reservoirs throughout the Gaza Strip that Hamas is stockpiling. That is the fuel. Hamas, even a few days ago, took fuel from the United Nations, from UNRWA, and commandeered it for their own needs. That is the fuel that needs to go to the hospitals. That is the fuel that needs to keep the pumps for the water system to operate. That is their responsibility.
Lieutenant Colonel, I just want to go back to that image that the IDF posted on social media. Do you have evidence that Hamas has fuel in those tanks? And if not, why don't you take it out?
So again, we're not targeting the people of Gaza. That fuel needs to go to the people of Gaza. We will not supply the fuel. That has been a very clear message from our government.
And you're certain those tanks are full?
Need to be part of the solution of ridding us and ridding the people of Gaza from this brutal, merciless terrorist organization that has no regard for any life, Israeli or Palestinian. Regarding the evidence, of course, when before this all happened, 19 days ago, before Hamas came into our towns in the south of Israel and beheaded babies and butchered people and raped women, the fuel was flowing through Israel's crossings into Gaza. So we know what Hamas have because it came through us. This is the absurd situation. There is fuel in Gaza. There are sufficient needs. I would also add that over the recent years, all of the main facilities, especially hospitals, have all developed solar energy power. So there is power in the Gaza Strip. It's just who is responsible for the Gaza Strip? It is the governing authority of Gaza. That is Hamas. Israel is responsible for securing the safety of the people of Israel. We would refuse to be held hostage by Hamas. The international community, and specifically the humanitarian aid organizations, need to be part of the solution of ridding this world of this brutal, merciless organization that has no regard for human life, Israeli or Palestinian.
The problem is with this is I don't think any of the humanitarian organisations like that characterisation as if they want to help Hamas. They don't want to help Hamas. They want to help the suffering children and people in hospitals. My worry is that eventually Gaza will start giving out the figures of how many people are dying not of war. You know, how many people in the hospital died because their ventilators turned off. How many people died of septicemia, or dehydration, or water poisoning, or succumb to heart attacks and all those things, not because of war, not because of bombings, not because of anything other than the siege. And then that if they are found to be civilian and not soldiers or not part of Hamas, then if they're collateral damage, then yeah, but if there's too many of them, which I suspect there will be because they're in hospitals, and if they're in hospitals, I think that will change the argument, and this isn't going to be conducive to Israel getting what they need. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think anyone wants terrorists to exist. We don't want terrorists to exist. We also don't want oppression to exist. We don't want lots of things to exist. There's lots of things going on here all at once, and they all need to stop. All the things that are wrong need to stop, and only good things need to continue. But the problem is the world and the world leaders, a lot of their eyes are closed to these things, and a lot of the things are, well, it's just how it is. We've allowed our humanity to be weakened by this not understanding that we're all human beings and we need to treat each other as that. And this is our one existence. Anyway, that's all this.
Lieutenant Colonel, the IDF has dropped leaflets into Gaza appealing for information about hostages, guaranteeing confidentiality and a reward. It's 2.5 weeks since they were taken hostage. Why has it taken that long to send that message into Gaza?
I'd say we're utilizing all of the tools at hand, and this can be another option. Obviously, the people of Gaza are suffering from Hamas, and there may be somebody that knows something that might be willing to help bring this bring this war to an end, and bring the unlawful holding of 222 Israelis, men, women, children from the young age of 9 months, and the elderly over the age of 80 back home. Decent people will do the right thing.
And if people no longer have electricity, use phones in Gaza because Israel has cut supply, how would they reach the IDF if they did have information?
Linda, we've seen extensive reportage from Palestinians reporting what's going on in Gaza. I would argue there's, while the situation obviously is not easy and it is difficult and dire for the people, there is messages going in and messages coming out all the time. You have extensive coverage from yourself at CNN.
So I spoke to another family member of a hostage whose mother was taken hostage by Hamas. He wants to ensure that the number one priority is the return of hostages. When it comes to hostages or a ground offensive, what is the number one priority right now?
The ground offensive is a tool, Linda. It's just part of the solution. The ground offensive is part of the solution to rid us from Hamas. The hostages, as said by our chief of staff and by our prime minister, obviously, is top priority. Indeed, they work in tandem, they work side by side, and they are part of the solution to this crisis. This is not a war we asked for. It is a brutal offense against our sovereign borders. It is an offense against our people. It is an offense against all decent people in the world. And so it needs to end with a very, very clear message. The people need to be released. They need to be released now. International Committee of the Red Cross need to have access to assess the situation and the well-being of the hostages that are being held against their will. The unfathomable crimes that Hamas has committed need to be held accountable for them. And we intend in changing the paradigm once and for all. What we're asking from the world is to support this effort to change the paradigm, to free Israel from this looming threat, from the never-ending sword of death that Hamas wields above our heads, but also free the people of Gaza from this terrible organization that has failed them miserably as a governing authority, as an organization, as a terrorist entity that has no regard for anybody's life.
Lieutenant Colonel, we've spoken recently about the concerns that this could become a wider regional conflict. We've already saw the exchange of fire between Hezbollah in Lebanon and Israeli forces. And now we are seeing a similar exchange between Israel and Syria, targets in Syria. What can you tell us about that?
We are concerned that this could go a lot broader. The situation on the ground is very concerning. We have reinforced our military positions on both the border with Lebanon and, of course, on the border with Syria. Hezbollah in itself has launched extensive attacks against our people, our civilians, our military operating near the border, so much so we've had to evacuate over 30 communities from the border with Lebanon and the town of Kiryat Shmona, a small town of some 25,000 people. So we are taking the necessary steps in order to evacuate our people from harm's way. We are very clear. If you attack us, we will respond, and we will respond with force. Lebanon needs to understand, for instance, that these attacks happening from Lebanese territory are jeopardizing Lebanese security. So they need to get Hezbollah under control and make sure and stop them from attacking us. And to all of those terrorist organizations that think that this might be a good time to challenge Israel, look very carefully how we are dismantling, destroying Hamas, and pursuing their leaders. Really think very well if you want to cross that threshold. We will not be patient towards any aggression against Israel.
Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, we appreciate your time joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you.
So he wants the Red Cross in, and the Red Cross should go in, isn't it, to check these? Well, ideally what should happen is Hamas should give all the hostages back now. And, well, they shouldn't have taken them in the first place, and then give themselves up so that the people of Gaza don't have to suffer anymore. But like you said, they're not, like most organisations, like most world leaders, their vested interests aren't the people, it's themselves and the system. And they're more worried about land and borders. Like he was saying, this, the attack on the border and against his people. The problem is these are man-made constructs, because in like the way I see things, and when you strip away all these things, you look at the actual truth, the absolute truth, the intrinsic truth. We're actually all human beings. The tags, we came from one tribe of people and we spread out across the place that we found ourselves upon. Maybe there was 2 tribes. We don't know, but we're all human beings. That's the key thing. And through time, we've given ourselves different names to categorise ourselves, put ourselves in boxes, and thus cause this problem because we can't live with each other, even though we're all human beings. And then borders, of course, they're, the land that we found ourselves upon was all of ours. And if you believe in religion, it's all, God gave it to everyone, not to specific people. So we can't be cutting it up and saying, this is mine. That's against, lots of biblical and Quranic teachings of pride and, hubris and all that kind of stuff. We don't need, we can give it names, that's fine. Like we give animals names and ourselves and our babies, but the land is all of ours. It can't really be cut up. It's the earth, what we've called, and we all share it, and we all should be able to share it with the human beings that we all are. But unfortunately, you hear this from all sides and Western leaders, how they want to die and fight and cause atrocities, whether it's terrorism or whatever, in the name of these falsehoods of cutting up land and possessing it and controlling human beings. And that's why they don't really care about the suffering and the children that are dying, because if they did, we wouldn't be doing these things. Any people, there would be no guns, there would be no bombs, there would be none of these things. But there are. And what does that say about us? And now to bring it back to the situation here is from CNN about the torment that people went through at this music peace festival. Let's just play that.
Morning.
We are learning more about the people killed during the Hamas attacks more than 2 weeks ago. 28-year-old Laor Abramov lost contact with his parents after fleeing the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. Now his mother, Mikhail Haliv, has received confirmation of his death. CNN's Erin Burnett spoke with her about how she's dealing with the grief of losing her only child.
When he was born, I felt like I received a precious diamond into my hands, that all I need to do is take care of him and his well-being and protect him and keep him safe from the world. And I keep getting stories now from that specific party. Survivors wrote to his father and to me saying, initially when the whole mess began, he was one of the first to tell people what to do, to show people the way, to give a glass of water to the scared girls that were with him. And yes, he is. I can't talk about my only son as someone in the past. He's a gentle, loving, beautiful human being.
It's an incredible gift to be able to be that kind of a person.
Yeah. And so it's not only that I lost the light and love of my life, but the world lost an amazing human being. And I really have a message actually for the world, if I can say something, yes, if it's okay. Please. I want to send out a message to the world. We need to raise lovers. We need to raise children on love, because my son, he was not a fighter. He was raised on love. And the people who attacked him and all the others in this horrible massacre, heartless massacre, they were not raised on love. No. And there are also Palestinian mothers who raise their children on love, but they are held hostages over there in Gaza by the Hamas.
You're talking with such compassion. Where do you find that? Do you have the rage, or have you've been able to deal with that?
I don't know about rage. My heart is broken. And I feel like rage leads to more violence, and I can't bear any more violence in this world.
Well, thanks for joining us this hour. I'm Linda Kincaid. I'll be back with much more news and CNN Newsroom after a very short break.
Hey, you could see how distraught
Here we go.
she was.
One of them.
Hey, that's terrible. But she's right. That's what we need to raise our children, love and peace. Human being, she used that term a lot, he was a human. And I think we lose sight of that sometimes because we're brought up in our patriotism of, oh, this is my country, I'm British, I'm English, I'm Scottish, I'm Irish, I'm Welsh, I'm Palestinian, I'm Israeli, I'm American, I'm Chinese, I'm Russian. And it's easy for our world leaders to buy into that and then get us to go and, like in Vietnam or Second World War or whatever war conflict, to murder people that are just like us, that have families and children, and we willingly go and do these things. And then, like with Iraq and Afghanistan, when they came home, how they felt, and all Vietnam when they came home, and then they were just abandoned. And they have a lot of mental health issues and a lot of suicides. Because we're used, businesses use us to keep the world running and making unnecessary, lots of different things just to keep the system running of that you need this money to buy all these things, whereas everything is free here and we just tagged it and possessed it, whereas we could just all share it. Now to BBC News.
Good morning, it's Wednesday the 25th of October. A United Nations agency which looks after Palestinian refugees has warned it could stop its work in Gaza tonight if it doesn't receive urgent deliveries of fuel.
Well, last night, 8 trucks carrying food, water and medicine crossed the Rafah border between Egypt and Gaza. But Israel has banned fuel from entering the territory, saying Hamas could use it for military purposes. Well, Hamas is designated as a terrorist organisation by many Western governments, including the UK.
Well, there are now growing international calls for a humanitarian pause in the fighting to allow aid to reach Gaza's residents. Our Middle East correspondent Yolande Knell has the very latest.
Made their way into Gaza last night. But what's not getting in is fuel. Hospitals are struggling. Here, medics use their phones to light the way as a patient arrives, as there's no fuel for generators, and they're overwhelmed by casualties. Israel has banned fuel from entering the territory, saying Hamas, designated as a terrorist group by many Western governments, including the UK, may use it for military purposes. The UN agency, which looks after Palestinian refugees, has warned it could stop its operation in Gaza as soon as tonight without it.
If we do not get fuel by tonight, we are going to have to halt our operations, and that is likely to impact at least 600,000 people who are currently sheltering in 150 of our schools and other buildings.
With plenty of aid building up in Egypt, there's frustration about the sluggish relief effort.
This is one of the WHO truck loaded with the needed urgent needs for patients inside Gaza. There is a trauma kits, there is medicine and drugs, there is a disposable, which is much needed now to treat the patient and to manage casualty inside Gaza.
There's been a big jump in the death toll, with official Palestinian figures showing many hundreds killed in the past 24 hours. At the UN, the Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the bombardment and blockade of Gaza violated international law, as did the use of civilians as human shields by Hamas.
I'm deeply concerned about the clear violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing in Gaza. Let me be clear, no party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law.
But diplomatic efforts continue. Now international calls are mounting for a humanitarian pause in fighting, with the US proposing a temporary lull in hostilities short of a formal ceasefire. And while Israel's war with Hamas is raging, there are other fronts heating up. Thousands of troops are now gathering on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, and there were strikes in neighbouring Syria overnight. It adds to the fears that what's happening in Gaza will create wider regional turmoil. Yolande Knell, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman joins us now from southern Israel. Morning, Tom. Can you just explain to us, first of all, why the fuel is not being allowed in?
Well, it's not being allowed in because Israel has refused to allow fuel access at the border crossing with Rafah. Now, remember, historically, Israel and Egypt have always had, or for 16 years now, have had a tight blockade of the Gaza Strip, which has controlled much going in and out. Now, since the start of these hostilities, what we saw was Israel say it would impose what it called a complete siege around Gaza. Its energy minister had said nothing would go in or out until the hostages were freed by Hamas. Now, what we've seen since Saturday is some aid trucks being allowed to pass the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Israel. That has been extremely limited, a very small number comparative of what is needed for the desperate humanitarian situation in Gaza. Those trucks have contained food, water and medicines, but critically not fuel. And that's because Israel has said it won't allow fuel in. It thinks it will be stolen and exploited by Hamas. But what you've heard is the United Nations UNRWA, the United Nations agency that provides services to Palestinians, saying that that fuel is now so critically needed to fuel their own humanitarian operation, to fuel bakeries, to provide bread for people, and critically water filter systems, with people reduced to drinking dirty water from wells, drinking seawater now. There's a huge risk to people's health, so they need the fuel for that humanitarian aid. And as you were hearing there, UNRWA now saying if no fuel is allowed in today, they will have to stop their humanitarian operations tonight.
We're also hearing, aren't we, Tom, calls from the international community for a pause in hostilities. How likely do you think that is to happen anytime soon?
Yeah, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the UN overnight, saying for the first time the US has used these words, calling for a humanitarian pause. He accused Hamas of using civilians as human shields, but the US has also repeatedly called on Israel to abide by what they call the laws of war, to respect civilian lives. So there is this now, increasing call for some sort of pause in the fighting to allow an increasing flow, a humanitarian corridor through Rafah. I think it's pretty unlikely, to be honest. We've seen increased bombardment overnight again by the Israelis over Gaza, just south of here. More incoming rocket fire from Gaza here into southern Israel. In Ashkelon here, there were more sirens earlier this morning, and Palestinians reporting the deadliest day in Gaza so far yesterday. UN officials who have been touring hospitals in Gaza say there are now bodies of the dead, including children, simply being kept in tents outside hospitals because the morgues are full.
Grim details, Tom. Tom Bateman reporting live for us from southern Israel. Thank you very much indeed. Now Ben has more of today's news.
There was any more on this one?
And his deputy, Angela Rayner, will meet with Muslim MPs this afternoon amid tensions over the leadership's stance on the Israel-Gaza war. It comes after an Islamic centre visited by Mr Starmer accused him of gravely misrepresenting its position. Well, let's talk to our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman. Morning to you, Henry. What are we expecting this meeting to achieve?
This all stems from an interview that Keir Starmer gave actually a couple of weeks ago, in which he appeared to suggest that he believed Israel had the right to cut off fuel and electricity, water and electricity from Gaza. And Keir Starmer now says he didn't mean to say that. He thought he was answering a different question. He points out that every time he's spoken about this issue in the House of Commons, he's called for humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. But in the couple of weeks since he gave that interview, clips of that interview have ricocheted around social media, around WhatsApp groups and so on. And the anger only seems to have intensified. And I think the row about this visit to Islamic Centre in South Wales is symptomatic of that, because Keir Starmer visited, he put out a tweet about the visit he'd conducted, and then it is very clear from the statement that the Islamic Centre put out last week that a lot of their members were furious that they had hosted Keir Starmer. And if you bring that to Parliament, what Labour MPs are concerned about is they are hearing the same fury, the same concerns, the same anger from their constituents. And I think that's what this meeting will be about. It will be about Keir Starmer trying to reassure them about what his position is and about his ability to contain this frustration. But it is a bit tense, and it is a tricky one for Keir Starmer.
Henry, for now, thanks very much joining us there live from Westminster.
It seems like no one can differentiate the difference between Muslims and terrorists.
Pulling the strings.
It's still going on. You know, that's where they wrongly used to use the term Islamic terrorists, whereas, you know, with the IRA, it wasn't Christian terrorists, it was just terrorists. And that's done on purpose. And that's that mindset, again, I'm talking about. The mindset we see throughout history. Throughout, you know, where people are subjugated to different standards and treated differently based on this mindset, but it's still here with us, with human beings. And yeah, there's no problem with Keir Starmer seeing British Muslims who may support, you know, Palestine, obviously, because they're fellow brothers, because we differentiate between Palestine and Hamas. But I see there's that greying area, and his probably a lot of the racist constitute members are, you know, they don't, oh, why are you meeting with Muslims? Are you supporting terrorists? And like, there's no connection between the two. But people are losing that because of that mindset again of seeing, you know, they're not distinguishable. Like, terrorists come from all organisations, all countries, all races. You know, it's not just the Muslim terrorists. You know, there's loads of them historically, because it's part of, I guess, the failed part of humanity that feels that they've got no other way to fight because they don't have an army. They just do these things, but it's wrong. Yes, and that's what I'm saying. But people that seem to be sort of making this argument, you know, like them, they seem to be suggesting that, you know, that he's going to be, Keir Starmer's going to be questioned over meeting some Muslims. I mean, the more important thing is if he did say that statement. But it's easy how you can get out of the statement and say, oh, I thought I was answering a different question. And he should know better being a lawyer. Maybe he hasn't read up on international law. Alright, now, Sky News, this is Robert Jenrick. Not Robert Jenrick, this is the Labour, I can't remember his name. And this is so wishy-washy because they want to get in power, so they're too scared of saying anything. And his compassion to the children doesn't seem to really come across. It's stoic again, like all of these world leaders, and it just makes you worried that when you see these world leaders seeing these images that we're all seeing, and I'm sure that we're shedding tears and feeling, you know, no matter what our situation is, that children shouldn't be suffering no matter, you know, what tag we've put on them.
People at heart either.
So is Labour calling for a ceasefire? Temporary ceasefire?
Well, all I'm saying is that the quickest way to get to that would be for those hostages to be released. No, I'm answering it because those hostages have not been released, have they? Hostages have not been released, and Hamas continues to attack Israel. That's why Israel...
And in the meantime, civilians are being killed left, right and centre.
I understand, and nobody...
And a ceasefire would stop that.
Of course.
So why don't you call for one?
Well, because it's entirely understandable for Israel to want to continue to try to get those hostages back from Hamas terrorists and to try to stop Hamas from attacking Israel, which is happening on an ongoing basis. Nobody wants to see these scenes unfolding in Gaza. Nobody wants to see civilians, children, women, people, all types of people being affected by this.
Wouldn't a pause allow for clearer heads?
Sorry, said that.
Wouldn't a pause allow for clearer heads?
Well, I'm sure that it would, but you have to understand Israel's position. I think if, you know, Britain had British hostages being held by terrorists, we would want to recover them, and we wouldn't stop from our efforts of trying to recover them. So you empathise with Israel in wanting to be able to do that. And the quickest
UN
route
Secretary General doesn't.
Well, look, I mean, the UN Secretary General is calling for peace as well, and I think, I mean, it's not for me to speak on behalf of the Secretary General, but I think all of us would say that Hamas needs to return those hostages to Israel and stop attacking Israel so that we can get to a position of peace and back to a political dialogue.
Comfortable with his comments overnight, not least the Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. 1,400 murders did not happen in a vacuum, he said.
Look, I'm never going to provide any justification for a terror organisation unleashing terrorist attacks on any country. But what I would say is that, of course, this is an extremely sensitive and emotive issue, rightly and understandably, for people on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side.
So did he overstep, do you think?
Well, it's not for me to mark the UN Secretary General's
No, but you're allowed to
homework,
have an
Kay.
opinion.
I am, but look, as a Labour politician, we hope to come into government next year. There are proper ways of doing these things. I'm sure British diplomats at the UN will be talking to the Secretary General on behalf of the British government. It's not for me to provide an alternative running commentary in news interviews.
What's your response to his language?
It's up to the Secretary General to decide what language he wants to use. The whole basis of the UN is that you try to bring countries together to get to points of resolution and compromise and peace. He's clearly taken a decision to use the lines that he's used, and he's now going to have to talk to his partners at the UN about that and how best the UN can support getting to a position of peace. But it's, as I say, it's not for me to mark the Secretary General's homework.
Clear violations of humanitarian law in Gaza. Does Labour agree with that?
Well, again, you don't want to see water, food, energy being turned off in Gaza. It has horrific consequences for people in Gaza. The hospital that was bombed, we think from the intelligence confirmed by the British government and the Americans, that came from a rocket coming out of Gaza. These are not the scenes that you should be seeing in any war. Hospitals should be protected. Energy, water, food should be made available to innocent civilians, and you want to get to a position where that is the case. But it's not for me to make any judgment on what is or isn't a war crime. We have international courts, a judicial system that has to consider those issues properly, and I'm sure that they will be considered in due course.
We've heard from Save the Children as well, and they've made a direct appeal to the Prime Minister to demand a ceasefire now. So are they misstepping as well?
I've not said anyone's misstep, Kay, and I'm not saying Save the Children.
I'm not quite sure what you are saying. Should there be a ceasefire or not?
Well, to answer your question about Save the Children,
yeah.
Again, I entirely empathise with their position. I mean, I watched the news last night of children being affected by this, and it's clearly deeply sad, and you don't want any child to be in that situation. And I understand, therefore, why they are calling for that. All I'm saying to you is that on issues of ceasefire or other issues, there are proper diplomatic routes that need to be followed for those types of discussions to happen. It's not for MPs such as myself in TV interviews.
No, it's not just you're representing Labour today, so
But let me answer that question as well, though, Kay, because the Labour Party is a party preparing for government. We hope that we might be in government next year. So what I say today could have implications for what a Labour government might have to do. No, but that's why I'm being very limited in what I'm saying to you today, because if we are to come into government next year, it will be for David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, for our diplomatic service to have conversations in a proper and professional way. And politicians can say things very easily or share things on social media or in news studios that can have implications for that type of process. And all I'm saying is that I'm going to be handling this situation in a professional way.
So Gutierrez is not being proper and professional at the moment, then?
Well, that's a different question, and that's not what I said.
It is a different question.
Yeah. And I'm saying that for the United Nations, which is not the British government, Labour's not going to be running the United Nations, that's a decision for the Secretary General, and it's a decision he's clearly taken.
Okay. You wanted to talk about Rishi Sunak today, first anniversary. I mean, he steadied the...
Hey, I mean, it's like he just doesn't. I mean, that was very wishy-washy, no?
What is?
Isn't it? I mean, all he cares about is what he says, just in case he says something wrong and everyone doesn't vote Labour. I think everyone's going to see how he was worried about that more than the suffering that's going on and the international law that, I mean, he seems to even, talk about there shouldn't be the electricity or water and food being denied, but he doesn't seem to equate that with international law. Or maybe he thinks that's Hamas's problem because they're running. That's the way you get out of it. That's probably what they're going to argue at the ICC. IDF are on
to rally around the need for the change. We understand, everybody in Israel understands, and if I'm sitting on the 8th of October and on the 9th of October, and my wife is saying, are they going to end up where we live? Are they going to come here? Are they going to come into our house? That is the sentiment of most Israelis today. And while war is a devastation of humanity, Israelis realize that we've never endured the magnitude of such a a terrible, horrific, brutal attack against us in all of our history since those that are saying since the Holocaust in one day, that is exactly accurate. And that is why Israel feels this is not a war of retribution, but rather a war of our existence, where so many are saying, we can chop off your heads or your hands or cut out the babies from mothers' bellies and just go on. And that is why Israeli society is so very determined that the situation has to change.
Do you have any, before I let you go, Lieutenant Colonel, do you have any words of comfort at all or solace for the mothers in Palestine today?
This is a tragedy on both sides of the fence, and I watch the dramatic images that you are showing, and my heart weeps for all of the civilians that are caught up in this. And indeed, I hope that the people of Gaza will have the peace that they deserve, just as the people of Israel deserve. Unfortunately, it's Hamas that is pulling the strings and has caused so much pain and destruction on both sides of the fence. And our job as the Israel Defense Forces is to restore that security.
Thank you for taking the time to join us, Lieutenant Colonel. Thank you.
Good day. Good day.
You too. Continuing coverage on Sky.
I don't know. It's so difficult, isn't it? All I do know is that human beings are suffering and dying. And how can we stop this? Stop it now and stop it in the future. Take care, take it easy, God bless, and peace.